Welcome friends to a new session on methodology of teaching natural science. In this session we will discuss various aspects of critical pedagogy in detail. Present practices in teaching and learning, part 1, critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy, basic assumptions. Critical pedagogy is a teaching approach which attempts to help students to ask questions and challenge dominations of various types. It trains students to be critically conscious. How to be critically conscious will be the question that arises here. An individual is able to be critically conscious by thinking, reading, writing and speaking with a conscious effort to go deep beneath the superficial meaning. Challenging beliefs and traditions also help to develop critical consciousness. According to critical pedagogy, students should have the courage to reject received wisdom and instead build it for themselves. Paulo Freire was the most famous proponent of critical pedagogy, who was well known for his legacy of commitment, love and hope for oppressed people throughout the world. His famous quote explores the basics of his ideology. It goes thus: I didn't understand anything because of my hunger. I wasn't dumb. It wasn't lack of interest. My social condition didn't allow me to have an education. Experience showed me once again the relationship between social class and knowledge. In 1968, Freire published his most famous book, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which he outlined the characteristics of critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy is meant to develop a new foundation for learning for the people living under conditions of oppression. The conditions of oppression can be different, such as race, class, religion, physical ability, gender, etc. And according to critical pedagogy, education is an empowerment to overcome the oppression. One of the key objectives of critical pedagogy is to allow students to acquire the necessary social skills. Such skills are essential for them to actively participate in a transformed and inclusive democratic community. Critical pedagogy demands for the inclusion of those who have been excluded from power the right and ability to have a position in the social and public life. Hence, the pedagogy of Freire is centered around a dialogical, interactive and anti-authoritarian approach in which the social and political critiques of everyday life is the center of the curriculum. Learning, according to critical pedagogy, is an act of knowing, that is, an active process which is taking place in two interrelated contexts. One of the contexts of authentic dialogue between learners and educators as equally knowing subjects, and the second is the real society in which people exist. Characteristics of critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy signifies many things as unique in education. Now let's see what they try to bring into education. Anti-colonial education. The first postulate is that education was propagated for the interest of colonialism, which is entirely different from the communities of different localities. So, critical pedagogy advocates that native population should have their own education system. Their education system should not simply be an extension of the culture of their colonizer, but a unique one. The role of indigenous knowledge. It is a fact that we are losing most of our traditional knowledge at a very fast rate. According to critical pedagogy, such indigenous knowledge is very important. Learning about our culture, history, medicinal practices, religion, heritage, etc. can have a transformative effect on our lives and lead to our own empowerment. Identifying sources of power. Who is holding power? What are the interests of the power holder? These are significant questions according to this ideology. Students must be able to identify the sources of power in their society and to analyze competing power interests between groups and individuals within their society. They must be able to identify who gains and who loses in specific situations in society, and students should also be made aware that privileged groups in the society often support to project their interest to keep their advantages. Political nature of education. All education is political according to critical pedagogy. Here, politics stand for the power structure and the rules and regulations propagated by it. Both the teachers and students must be aware of the politics that surround education. Say, for example, it can be experienced in curriculum reforms in different levels. Naturally, the politics of the time determine the nature of the curriculum. It is applicable to other aspects of education also. Say, for instance, the constructivist approach to learning comes to our system because of a specific politics. Understanding the politics of knowledge. As we see in the case of education, the knowledge and its nature also is political. Students must understand the political nature of knowledge. It is most common when we go through mass media for information. Same incident will be informed differently by different media. Hence, understanding the power of knowledge is critical. According to critical pedagogy, many educational institutions use their power to keep the privileged on the top and the underprivileged on the bottom. They also view that most of the knowledge that we learn in schools is Western and written by dead white males. The domination of interest and nature of knowledge is reiterated by critical pedagogy. Justice and equality in education. Critical pedagogy always strives for a socially relevant vision for education. This significance of justice and equality also are stressed. The Right to Education Act of India is a strong move in this direction to provide education to all who completed the age of 6. Such a vision is inevitable for the system of education. The rejection of economic determinism. It is a general perception that everything in this era is determined by economy, but critical pedagogy argues that economic factors alone do not decide who has power and who does not. So they claim that there are various other factors which are equally or more importantly influence oppression. Let's see these factors: race, class, gender, religion and physical ability are the factors causing oppression in various societies. Students must be able to realize that people are also oppressed because of these issues other than just economical conditions. Goal of schooling is to lessen human suffering. Suffering is a reality to the oppressed people, and decrease of oppression and human suffering is a key aspect of the purpose of education according to critical pedagogy. So, it is the duty of teachers to think about whether our system of schooling elevate or aggress suffering, which is critical in our context. End of banking system of education. One of the prominent characteristics of critical pedagogy is the concept of banking system of education. They viewed that traditional system of education considers students as an empty account to be filled in by the teacher. Critical pedagogy strongly opposes this concept and insists that teachers should know that students have life experiences and their own knowledge is the key in shaping their education and learning. They remarked that banking system of education anesthetizes and inhibits creative power. But unfortunately, this still is prevalent in existing system of education. Critical pedagogy perceives students as potential contributors to learning as they bring rich experiences to the classrooms. Change in relationship between student and teacher. In a traditional concept, as you know, teacher and students are separated by a huge gap of the giver and the taker. The students are supposed to respect teachers because they are teachers. But according to critical pedagogy, the relationship should be one of equal respect between teacher and student. It is an act of mutual sharing. A class in which the teacher who learns and the learner who teaches is the vision to teacher-student relationship. In such a context, learner responsibility pre-preparation is equally important because it is the duty of the learner to come prepared for the class as a teacher does. Implications of critical pedagogy. Critical pedagogy envisages an evolution or revolution of the following: schooling versus education, control versus democracy, authoritarianism versus authority, individualism versus individuality, de-skilling versus reskilling, traditional literacy versus critical literacy. Let's see each one in detail. Schooling versus education. Generally, we mean schooling for education. In the existing structure of schools, there are rigid rules, structure, standardized curriculum, etc. to ensure that something prescribed by authority. According to critical pedagogy, the basic logic for schooling relies on preparing students for a market economy. The traditional school system promotes competition, creates the feeling that better jobs buy specific education by promoting a feeling of survival of the fittest. This results in strict accountability models for teachers, stereotyping, dry teaching methodologies, rote learning, and forgetting information the next day or simply after a test, etc. Education involves passion for one's subject, matter, and build up a strong desire to teach and to learn. So, a teacher should be able to challenge the presuppositions, particularly the negatives of the institution. In other words, to educate means to resist the very basic school value structure and the long list of don'ts. The kind of education given to students should be helpful for them to create a space for them so that they can be critical citizens. In short, teacher generates democracy in classrooms. Many teachers join to a course on education and the profession of teaching with a vision to educate students. But once they become a part of the system, they are also led to schooling instead of educating. Control versus democracy. We perceived schools as the place for training students according to different control measures. Controls are in the form of restrictions. Say, for example, the subject of study. One cannot study the subject of his or her choice due to restrictions. There are, of course, restrictions in taking subjects for higher studies also. Suppose the student studied computer application along with his humanities subjects, he or she cannot join for a BSc Computer Science or Computer Applications as mathematics is essential requirement for admission. This is only an instance. Restrictions are plenty in many forms. You will have your own experiences in this regard. Critical pedagogy advocates for democracy in place of control. Each individual has the responsibility to frame rules. First frame rules, then obey it is the basis of democracy. However, critical pedagogy holds the democratic principle must become a way of instruction in all subject areas and all extracurricular activities. Say, for example, the school and class rules should be written cooperatively by teachers and students. They should negotiate to choose the forms of testing other than taking the regular route or the standardized tests only. Authoritarianism versus authority. A school is a typical example for a top-down hierarchy of authority, starting from the head of school, class teachers, subject teachers, class monitors, group leaders, etc. form a rigid hierarchy. Such a hierarchy is suitable for implementing a standardized curriculum, a rigid role structure, and authoritarian nature of schools. This doesn't mean to abandon school structure, but rather to redefine the structure as democratic. Authority has multiple meaning according to critical pedagogy. Traditionally, teacher is the sole authority as the custodian of knowledge. But now, in the changing scenario, teacher is the only one among many resources. There are aspects in which students are better than teachers. Say, for example, handling of technology, especially mobile technology. Teachers are far behind their students. So it is essential that teachers and students share each other's knowledge. Learning thus becomes a joint venture and dialogical. That is, teachers also learn many things about students, their culture, etc. Thus, for a teacher, it is very essential to know their students, their backgrounds, language, culture, etc. to become an authority in classrooms. Individualism versus individuality. Critical pedagogy viewed that the traditional system of schooling fostered individualism by its various forms of competition. Here, the belief is that the individual is the center of everything. A spirit of survival of the fittest mentality is fostered. The quest for individual achievements are rooted in the school initially in the form of grades and in later life as goods, wealth, status, etc. Say for instance, a feeling is created among students that those who score a grade in all subjects in the board exam is superior to the others. This causes many divisions among students and even parents. We cannot avoid the individualism all the time, but we can challenge it when necessary. De-skilling versus reskilling. De-skilling means fitting persons according to the structure of the system. De-skilling has to do with teachers executing someone else's goals and plans. As pre-service teachers, you are taught various skills to teach, such as to write lesson plans, adopt different teaching methodologies, to conduct tests, etc. According to critical pedagogy, all these are ways to de-skill teachers. This happens when the skills teachers are taught in teachers' education are unusable in practice in many areas. Reskilling occurs when a teacher is able to find a way to educate in place of schooling. A critical teacher shows acts of reflection to issues and aspects that challenge form of personal and institutional oppression. Traditional literacy versus critical literacy. Traditional literacy directs schools to a mechanical mastery of skills for students in basics of reading, writing and arithmetic. The only aim of traditional literacy is promotion to a higher class, but with little creativity and no sense of purpose. Critical literacy, on the contrary, distinguishes itself from traditional literacy in that it requests teachers to teach for analytical purposes, for multiple interpretations, for moral reasoning. Under critical literacy, the educated teacher as well as student takes issues such as gender, class, religion and race seriously, both in classroom management as well as curriculum content. Critical literacy allows the teacher to establish proper connection between curriculum and content with student experience. Thus, critical literacy makes knowledge more relevant and introspective for both teacher and student. Critical pedagogy and roles of students. Critical pedagogy strongly demarcated the power of students in education. The first and most important role is to create a curriculum, a negotiated one, including assessment, equally owned by teachers and students. A negotiation at the stage of curriculum development itself strengthens it in many ways. Another role of the student is that they have to choose what and how to learn. It is a great privilege to students as they can demand what they need and what is the interesting way to learn a topic. Defining outcomes of learning also is the right of students according to critical pedagogy. Because they have something in mind, they demand for that learn in the most preferred way, so naturally the outcome can be defined only by students themselves, not the teacher. Finally, how to assess the accomplishment also is the responsibility of the students. They have to design and use proper assessment procedure. Such experiences empower them by developing the sense of critical consciousness, which is the fundamental aspect of life according to critical pedagogy. Now let's see the views of critical pedagogy on assessment. Views on assessment. According to critical pedagogy, it is essential to achieve a critical approach to assessment. the nature of assessment in such a way that it must be centered around dialogic interactions so that the roles of teacher and learner are shared and all voices are validated. A very important aspect of assessment is that all voices, that is opinions, must be attended positively. Never follow the majority principle or never promote it, but collect and validate each and every opinion. Thus, they encourage to start exploring and stop following. Importance of student experience is another aspect of great concern according to critical pedagogy. Assessment must value and validate the experience that students bring into the classroom. Those experiences are considered as very vital in the process of learning. Such experiences should be placed at the center of the classroom context and processed in ways that problematize it and make overt links with oppression and dominant discourses. Critical pedagogy emphasizes narrative grading, portfolio assessments, group projects and performances, individual exhibitions and essay examinations that promote critical thinking instead of standardized or short answer tests. Critical pedagogy stress the role of self-assessment and peer review in assessment. They support self-directed assessment based on student-generated assessment criteria through student-generated assessment tasks. Removal of learning outcomes or delinking of assessment from learning outcomes is another important postulation of critical pedagogy. The rationale of such an idea is that when we stick on learning outcomes, we will follow some standardized procedure and not the unique student-generated assessment. Let us sum up the ideas that we have discussed during this session. We have discussed various aspects of critical pedagogy in this session, and the main points are as follows. A. Critical pedagogy is an ideology to educate and empower people subject to different kinds of oppression. B. Paulo Freire was the main proponent of critical pedagogy. C. Critical pedagogy has unique characteristics such as anti-colonial education, banking system, teacher-student relationship, significance of politics, etc. D. Critical pedagogy stands for developing education, democracy, critical literacy, authority, reskilling, etc. E. Critical pedagogy visualizes many powers in education, including curriculum construction, ways to learn, defining learning outcomes, and to determine means of assessment. Here are a few assignments for you to work on. 1. Bring out the basic aspects of critical pedagogy. 2. What are the essential characteristics of critical pedagogy? 3. Comment on the concept of banking system. 4. Which are the main areas to which critical pedagogy influences? And 5. Explain the concept of assessment by critical pedagogy. Now let me suggest few references for your future reading. Critical Pedagogy, 2nd edition by J. L. Kingello, published by Peter Lang, New York, 2008. The Art of Critical Pedagogy by M. R. Jeffrey and D. Andre, published by Peter Lang, New York, 2008. Pedagogy of the Oppressed by P. Freire, published by Continuum, New York, 2000. Critical Pedagogy, An Introduction by K. Barry, published by Burgeon and Gravy, Westport in 1999. Innovative Science Teaching by Radha Mohan, published by PHI New Delhi in 1995. Thank you for watching this program. Let's meet again in another episode with another topic. Till then, goodbye.